Hey everyone, welcome to Can't Afford to Record, the YouTube channel where we figure out the art of audio production together. My name is Robby Miller and today I get to speak to Mike Fasano. Now, you'll know Mike not just for being an amazing drummer and playing in an incredible band called Tiger Army, but he's also the go-to guy when it comes to supplying drums for recording studio sessions. I'm talking about bands like My Chemical Romance, Green Day, and Weezer. And that's just 3. You should go and check out the rest of his credits. It's amazing. So I was really thrilled to sit down with Mike and just ask him about what it's like supplying drum kits and being the drum tech for some huge albums. There are some great stories in this interview. I can't wait for you to hear it. Don't forget, if you want to listen to the podcast audio version of this conversation, then head over to Can't Afford to Record on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts and you will find it there. So thank you, Mike Fasano, for being on the podcast. I know you guys are going to love this conversation. Enjoy. Mike Fasano, welcome to Can't Afford to Record. Drum tech of the stars and also a drum star in his own right in the wonderful band Tiger Army. How are you doing?
I am doing well. Just trying to figure out all this magical internet, web, microphone, audio, because, I'm a drummer. And if you lose the R, I'm just a dumber.
Well, look, we figured it out because we're speaking right now, which is great. I'm so glad we managed to convince you to come on here, although credit to Ryan Roxy, mutual friend of ours, Ryan Roxy, for hooking this up. But the first question I ask everyone is, can you remember a time when you couldn't afford to record?
Of course. I mean, I go back to the days of cassette tapes and boom boxes. Which boom boxes back in the day had an amazing compressor built in. So your band could be jamming and it would compress it down and you'd get these really great recordings. Not that I was making, this was just rehearsal tapes or whatever, demos. Mm-hmm. This was prior to any kind of 4-track or anything like that. But you would always get these great tapes, and that's what I was listening to reference parts or this and that. And then, I don't know, maybe 10 years later, they cheapened the parts in them, and you couldn't have that easy access recording. Now you can kind of do it on your phone, and it does a really well job, but or a Zoom product or whatever. But but I do remember some of the first stuff I ever recorded was with this band called Darcy's Kiss, and we did it all on 8-track in a garage, 1/4-inch 8-track.
Wow.
In a garage. And the funniest thing about that was shortly after that, I had worked on a Rancid record up in Out Come the Wolves up in the Bay Area with Jerry Finn producing. And we were in a studio and this and that. I remember coming back home and listening to what we recorded on this 1/4-inch 8-track with Darcy's Kiss in a garage. I had went and heard the final mixes of Rancid some month later. This is all within a couple months. Mm-hmm. And it was weird. That was the first time I realized what a mixer could do to a band. So we had all these tones for Rancid, and I'm sure we'll get into this later, but sometimes if you have a fast punk rock song with Rancid, you would have a crackier snare drum. A slower song, you might have a fatter tuned open snare drum to fill the space. Mm-hmm. And I remember going to Epitaph Records, being with the drummer, Brett Reed, who was the drummer at the time, in Brett Gurowitz's office in the blue room or the blue couch or something, and listening to this record and listening to everything back. And it sounded so different. What had happened is the great Andy Wallace, who mixed it, had added some samples and some things. So those crispier snares for the faster stuff sort of got watered down. The fatter snares for the slower stuff sort of got watered down. So everything the snare drum sounded great, but from what we started with, it was extremely different. Right. And to me, I think some of the charm left. So going back, with that being said, when I heard our garage quarter-inch 8-track recordings for Darcy's Kiss, I was like, wow, this is really cool. My friend who obviously couldn't afford to record, didn't have a studio, didn't have a real thing. We did this thing created this thing. And to me, I thought, I was blown away how great it sounded. We didn't sample anything. We didn't have a mixer. We didn't have a whatever. It just sounded great for a recording we did in a garage. So that's one of my earliest memories from the nothing, the garage, to the major studio with the major mixer, with the major producer, with the major label, all that stuff. It sometimes, if you know how to use the no budget garage, sometimes that's better. To me, it seemed better.
So there was a little bit more magic in those recordings, which I think is, well, fortunately or unfortunately, becoming a cliched conversation, isn't it? It's about, a lot of people are like, we can add all that great stuff in later. A lot of people are all about no, let's get it right even before we hit record. Let's get this song and the sound that we want right now. But the problem with that is very hard to then recreate. Should you need to move all the stuff out the garage so the car can fit back in, and then the next day you just reset it all up again.
Sure. Unfortunately, this was a house with 5 band guys living in it.
Right.
And the garage was the rehearsal room / studio. But in the old days, and I say the old days, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even into the 2000s, it was all about getting, they captured magic back in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And then the 80s came and things became a little bit more processed and a little bit more under the microscope. But out of all of those times, it was always getting the best sound or the best performance, especially in the 80s, 90s, it was a thing. And I remember everybody competing with whatever that song on the radio was. You might be a punk rock band, and you're going to chase whatever the popular punk rock, if it was a Green Day or a Blink 182, that band, Newfound Glory, for example, was trying to get their stuff sonically to sound like those bands. Sometimes I was on sessions hearing somebody talk about, maybe it was a punk band, but they were referring to, I want to say Taylor Swift, because that's the thing that's on my head. Well, we've got to do something like what Taylor Swift did, because that's what people are hearing. It's always been, over the years, everybody's been chasing everybody. And
trying
the
to
Beatles,
everybody
chased the
else.
Beatles. Right. Even if the bands aren't simple, like Green Day or Blink or Newfound Glory aren't Taylor Swift, but they're going for that for some reason.
Yeah.
They're something that she had in a hit song that they're going to apply to what their recording style is. I've found that for a long time. It's always been sort of chasing what's popular, even though it might never sound like Taylor Swift from a Green Day, but yet that's the analogy.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. Maybe Taylor Swift's copying Green Day or Blink or one of these bands. Or
yeah. So sonically trying to achieve the same sort of sound, even though they could be two different genres and whatnot.
Yeah. And that's why certain people get involved in a record, a producer, an engineer, a mixer, or a certain studio, or you hire a guy like me to come in and bring drums that we know will work to get this sort of sound or whatever. So
it does seem like, being a drummer and being that you do need to pick the right drums for these studio sessions that you're involved in. Getting the sound right, as we were just talking about from the beginning, is pretty important. I feel like a lot of albums from the 90s really had that approach. I mean, I'm thinking about bands like Ben Folds 5, that first debut album, the first Fountains of Wayne album. It almost seems like they just threw the mics up and just hit record and got all that room sound in there, and just, I don't know, they weren't trying to be pristine, crystal clear, every recording note separately. It was like there was like this gooey sort of beefy sound of the 90s.
A guy like Ben Folds 5, for some odd, strange reason, I think I worked on one of his things. Maybe it was just Ben Folds and it wasn't the band.
Hmm.
I want to say I brought a drum set down and he played like everything. And we did it
Really?
at the old Sound City Studios. Um, I don't know what it for, but then again, you have a talented guy like Ben Folds, playing piano and writing and singing and all that stuff. That's the other thing too, is there's a, I mean, you could have the best studio, the best engineer, the best producer, the best band. But if you don't have a song, the song would be the source of where everything builds upon. In fact, I remember hearing the Rancid demos. Let's go back to that. Out Come the Wolves. I remember hearing the demos, and it was Tim and a guitar, and it's almost just the stuff without anybody else sounded so great. It was a good song. It was whether you're playing your guitar by the campfire or you're in the studio recording it with an orchestra. If the song is good, that's the whole start of it.
It
You could
trumps
have,
everything else.
if you have a shitty song. Can we say shitty on here, or
Yes,
do you
we
bleep it
can.
out?
No.
If you have a shitty song, it doesn't matter what the production is to it. It's not gonna work. And so it's so source, whether it's a great sounding snare drum or drum kit or guitar, song is the source.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? And then
Yeah.
with that, then there's a lot of ways you can go. You could put a country angle to it, a punk rock angle to it, um, a hip hop angle to it. If that melody is there and those words are saying something, there's a lot of ways you can go with it.
Yeah. I have that outlook too. The song trumps anything else. It beats the production. If it's a great song, it will be very obvious it's a great song no matter what,
Yes, for sure.
Um so I do want to speak a little bit about your role in a lot of recording studios. You're a go-to guy where you are in LA in California, and um when you get involved in a project like um the Black Parade, My Chemical Romance, or you're involved in a Green Day record, who calls you up? Like, where do you get like? Is it they're like, well, our guy here at this studio is Mike Fasano, or our producer's calling you?
It's more producers, and
Right.
if a if a, if a producer doesn't know or an engineer doesn't know and they're at a studio and they're having a problem, or they don't like who else they've hired prior, then, and if they know me, because back in the day I was there 12 hours a day, 12 days in a row, you know what I mean, on a
Right.
record,
Right.
or whatever. So they were long days, so there's a lot of time spent. So usually it's the producer who calls, um, you know uh, and then, or the studio saying, hey, do you know about Mike, or what about Mike, or Mike, blah blah blah. So could help. It's funny, the technical precision in the studio is greater than what's happening live. So I've had to work I'm going to throw back to, I'm thinking about a band, MXPX, which Jerry produced. I remember they had their drum tech with them, and I was working on the record, and it was a few days, Conway Studios, and I met the drum tech, and I think he was bummed at he was bummed that he thought I was going to take his gig, and
Mhm.
after this recording I was going to go on the road with him. That was definitely not the case. But what was crazy is he just stayed in the lounge. He wasn't even in the studio. He wasn't being a part of the session,
Mhm.
and he wasn't being a part of, like, learning to see what I was doing. And I was more than willing to say, this is what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing it. And he just kind of took a back seat. And maybe that was his age
Mm.
or whatever. And his punk rockness, like, who are you and why are you doing this? And I feel excommunicated or something from the band,
Sure.
which was not the case. And but the bottom line is I had to do what I had to do. I never went on the road with him. I never took his gig
Mhm.
and whatever. So it's just weird. It's like, I wish I had the opportunity to work with a really great drum guy or whatever, to where I could learn some stuff. And I do. My friends at the pro drum shop, sometimes I get blown away when Stan's working on a drum that's collapsible, that can collapse into itself and then open back up, and then you tune it. And I was like, it just blows my mind. I know
Mm.
that's a tangent to go on, but one of the tricks he taught me, if you ever put a tom tom into a snare basket, like kind of old school, um, over the bass drum versus mounting it off the bass drum versus mounting it off the snare, you just set it into a snare basket. The funniest thing about that is um, sometimes you're holding a tom in your hand, doom, doom. You put it into the basket, doom, doom. It shortens
Mm.
out. Sometimes certain stands and certain drums shorten the note out. It's weird. So he told me this trick, and he got this foam, which we used to put this foam on our crossbars of our BMX bars. This foam, and he'd cut it up, and we put one little piece on each portion of the basket. And so it sort of floated the drum a little bit, and it made the world a different. It was something so simple, something he came up with, and I've used that many times when I've had the problem of the drum choking out
Right.
in the stand. So things like that, it's like I learned from that, and I use it to this day. So, anyways, going back to the kid, the drum tech from MXPX, not wanting to be there, that was just weird, you know.
Mm.
So, but on the other side of that, I've been hired by some producers. They've completely picked my brain, asked me a million and one questions, more than I've said to them about what
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing,
Mm-hmm.
and then have never hired me again because they've got it figured out now.
Right. Do
So,
you, do you,
but I'm still figuring it out. So how do you figure it out with one time
yeah.
using me? I'm still trying
Yeah.
to make it happen, you know. So, anyways,
No. Do you ever end up getting sort of roped into the engineering side of things as well? I mean, like, I guess I'm interested to know if you come into a session. I know this is maybe a really hard question because every session is different, perhaps for you. But could you maybe give us an example of what one session might be to another? So, are there times when you just like, here's the snare drum, see you later, or are there times where they're like, okay, Mike, we want you to put all the mics on this as well, and mic it up like you know how you want these drums to sound?
definitely not.
Okay,
I'm hired just to do the drums. My business is only the drums.
right,
Um, my knowledge is only the drums.
right,
Again, I've worked with the greatest engineers
of course,
that anybody can work with, and you know, and some of your listeners or viewers might understand this. Um, you can have a coal microphone using two coals as an overhead. How you treat to run it through your console, how you treat to EQ it, how you treat to use the farther room mics away, the middle room mics, how you blend all of that in a kit is not for me to tell you. I can't. Oh, use a coal microphone on it. That'll sound great. It's not, because there's you as the engineer is being an artist, and how you want to work the chain,
hmm
how your stuff goes through your console, what you EQ or whatever, however you're building it. So it's not for me to say. And I've been on sessions where a producer has I was on this this session with a band called Metric, and JMJ was the producer and Daryl Thorpe was the engineer. And JMJ had the console, at East West Studios. The console was doing stuff, but then just beyond the console was the producer deck, and he had a little thing with a few faders on it, and they were a very colorful board with faders on it. And he was able to switch some stuff, and it was a little annoying for the engineer who had his thing going a certain way. And if
mm.
the producer from the backseat driver, even though he's really the man that you has to have everything the way he wants it, um, he's the person in charge, was sort of screwing with the EQs or the compression levels or the reverbs or the gates or the whatever, the close mic and the blends of mics. So that was a little weird. But no, I try to stay out of it. But what I can give them is I can give them the source. I could
Right,
give them, if I hear what the song is, if it's that faster song, that tighter snare, I'll give them three options that will work. Any one of those three,
hmm
slower, middle, whatever. I just got to hear it and see what the vibe of the song is, see how the drummer is, how he hits, what they were going for. very occasionally I'm completely off the mark, but once they tell me where they're going with it,
Mm-hmm.
then I'll give them 3 options, you know what I mean?
Right.
And but usually they trust that I have a vibe just because of the time I've spent in the studio, um, and some of the stuff I've done with different bands, and some of the drums that they know or cymbals or whatever. They trust that I'm going to get them there closer and quicker than being farther away. So
Right.
no, it's like I said, it's just like when we were setting up for the podcast today. There was some things happening that
Mm-hmm.
were sort of became out of our control, and we had to figure out how to make it happen,
Right.
and that's what happens in there. It's not, I'm never the guy that would say, oh well, this drum set worked for this band, which has, this band which has nothing to do with this band. you
Mm-hmm.
know um it's just it's all individual. I know the things that work. I know the ranges of stuff I can pull out of them. And I have a bunch of stuff. So let's just say I'm hired on a session and I'm there, um all day, and it's going to be 5 days. And let's just say we get into it, and a couple of days in, I realize, oh man, it'd be really cool if we had this vintage, um, whatever kit for this thing, or this one orchestra bass drum, or this one field snare drum, parade snare drum. I can always grab it. We can bring it in once I get a vibe. But I mean, that's the musician side of me too. Understanding music, understanding what it takes, to get a sound, what it takes to fit a genre,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So that's my kind of specialty, is
Yeah.
bringing that to the table. Of course, sometimes, for example, I would say to them, the engineers or the producers, I would say, okay, we're using this 28-inch vintage Ludwig mahogany bass drum. We're going to do an overdub with it. When you hit that bass drum, sometimes 4 or 5 feet from the drum is where the note really envelops and
Mm-hmm.
gets round and low. So yes, of course, you can put a mic right to the kick drum, but then try one out here, try one far, use your ears to see where it's really getting round.
Yeah.
Walk and listen. I think a lot of guys, and my friend Joe McGrath and I, when Pro Tools started happening, Joe McGrath was Jerry Finn's engineer for years. We would kind of joke because a lot of the kids coming up doing Pro Tools we would call them engine eyes or engineers, because all they were looking at were wave files
Mm.
on the Pro Tools, versus really listening to, oh shoot, something's distorting, or something's, not sounding as full as it could be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and those guys are coming from an old school. I got to work with people on tape when they were doing tape,
Mm-hmm.
and then it became ADAT, and then it became Pro Tools or whatever. But
Right.
so I would just give a suggestion. Hey, put this mic on this big bass drum farther out. Listen to where it envelops. That sounds cool.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes you mic a snare drum with 2 snare drums on the top mics, 1 on the bottom. Sometimes guys mic the sound hole of the snare drum because they want to get that air popping
Mm-hmm.
thing. Sometimes a bass drum has a PZM microphone laying on a pillow inside.
Mm-hmm.
A Beta 52 also inside. Another mic right outside on the front head, farther out. Sometimes they even put a kick mic side mic. Sometimes you could have 3 or 4 mics on a kick drum. I mean, and it's a blend of all that stuff, you
It's
know?
quite amazing that and I guess it's really cool for you as well though, Mike, that you get to hear all your drum kits get mic'd up in different ways and get to start hearing the results. So that's even a little bit more of information that you can share with people like, well, this has been mic'd like this in the past, or um, you're just getting to hear your drums in all kinds of different weird and wonderful ways.
It's funny. Yes, I do, and it's great to hear other people. That's another thing too, is whenever I've played drums on a record or done anything, it's very hard for me to remember what snare drum I used, what cymbals I used, whatever. But when I'm working with somebody, I'm always jotting notes down. This
Mm.
song, this kit, this snare drum, whatever, just in case we have to refer back to it. Um, so it's great to hear these guys play, but also too, when you're not playing the kit and you're sitting in the control room and you're really hearing the drums isolated and how they're sitting in the track, then I can suggest, if something's, first of all, I don't suggest anything unless something's really wrong. If there's a vibe going and it's not necessarily the most perfect thing, but it's working in the big picture, then we're going. But if something's really wrong and we say, you know what, I think I have something better. Can we try this? You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's kind of knowing when to speak and when not to speak, even though I've been blessed, and I hate to use that word. I've been so lucky that the guys I work with want to hear if I have to say something, you know. But then again, I'm not telling them how to produce or engineer. I'm just, if something's, Ryan Roxy once told me, and I'll never forget this. He said that I have a strong knack for the obvious. So when something's really obviously wrong, I have a solution for it, or
Mm-hmm.
I have a path to get to that solution. So
Mm-hmm.
that's about the extent of me getting involved in any of that. But I also understand, like I said, again, because I play, I understand song structure, I understand melody, I understand movement, I understand all of this stuff. I'm fortunate enough to have acquired over the years a bunch of different options for that. And that's the whole thing, is having options. And I would say to any drummer going in to record, borrow a snare drum from a friend, borrow cymbals from a friend, bring your 2 snare drums, bring whatever, because you never know what's going to work. It saves time. Maybe that drum that you think is going to work, that you have, and you have it for a reason. Put your ego aside and listen to the thing that really works. It's about the big picture. The other thing too is all of a great sound is just opinion. You know, it's really truly just an opinion of of um, of how is it going to fit for the situation. Do you know what I mean? So when you're an engineer and or a producer, I know producers that have to have, oh, we got to use this guitar, or we've got to use my drum kit, or we've got to use this because it's their new purchase, it's their new thing, it's whatever. Not necessarily that it's the right thing or the wrong thing, but there's like an ego involved. Like, I've got
Yeah.
to use this. Um,
Or I paid money for it,
sure,
so I'm going to use
sure,
it.
yeah. So it's like basically, um, what's going to be the best thing to fit the situation for what we're doing, whether we're Darcy's Kiss in the garage in Van Nuys on, you know, 1/4-inch 8-track tape, or we're in the big lush studio of Capitol Records with whoever.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know,
Um,
it's what's going to be the best thing.
when just talking about what's going to be the best thing and different gear and equipment selection, and if you haven't got the equipment, then make connections, borrow
Yes,
equipment, do what you can, because you never know when or at least, or let people borrow your equipment, because you might not know when you need it in it the other way around sometime in the future. But I did hear the figures on another podcast, on Ryan Roxy's podcast you're on, but I would love to know the figures of your drum selection and your storage space, if you would be kind enough to share them.
sure, of course. Well, I mean, it's funny. I think on Ryan's podcast, I think I said I had 100 drum kits, and I checked myself, and probably over the years I've had 100 drum kits kind of come and go
Right.
until I found the right ones. I've counted, I'm at about 58 drum sets now that I still have,
Okay.
but I have some friends that have a kit at their place, friends that so there's a few other kits around. But I've amassed this collection of drums because I started getting calls. There's a few guys doing it in town, a few of the big companies, and I became an alternate to those companies because I was bringing something different to the table. We're all doing the same thing, but I was doing something different that people liked, and I was fortunate enough to work, you know, from Guns N' Roses to Green Day. The first couple records I ever did were within 6 months of each other.
Wow.
So I started getting the right things for the right situations. I started out using pork pie drums. That was the only drums that I had, and people were kind of blown away. They'd never heard of them. They sounded great. But I think more than anything, them being great drums, I think it's just because I knew how to tune. For some reason, I don't know how I know how to do it. I don't know why I know how to do it, because I don't have anything of that in my family, musical or whatever. Like my dad or whatever. Um, but for some reason, I know drums. I know how to do tuning. I know how to make things translate from the tracking room into the control room, or in the Darcy's Kiss situation, the control room and the tracking room with the same thing in the garage.
Yes.
But yeah, no. So I started hearing other producers saying, "Do you have these kind of drums? Do you have these kind of drums?" And I immediately just was smart enough to put everything that I made back into buying gear. So that's why I have 200 snare drums and 58 drum sets and whatever, because I was the option to the other guys in town that were doing it. And
Right.
of course, and I think I said this on Ryan's talk, I used, there's the 10 or 20 usual snare drum requests.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the 10 drum sets
Yeah.
that are the usual out of all of this. But if somebody's doing something special that I hear, then I can say, oh, I have that. Let me bring that down. You know what I mean? I have a great John Bonham kit. I've used it twice in 4 years. You know what I mean? Every
Right.
4 years I use it 2 times. But
Right.
that's the kit to have. And this is the most important thing: source, source, source. If
Yes.
you need a piccolo snare drum, a cracky snare drum, get a piccolo. Don't try to tune a big fat snare drum into a piccolo. It'll never have that character. And the old adage I could say to guitar players that everybody knows guitar stuff is like, you can't make a Strat sound like a Les Paul.
Right.
And you can't make a Les Paul sound like a Telecaster. I'm sure there's some kind of pedal effect or outboard or something that you could, but it would never be right. It would never be pure. So it's all source. Source is the most important thing. Source, source, source. No matter a microphone, snare drum, guitar, amp, Pro Tools, outboard gear,
Mm-hmm.
it's all source.
So would you let's say, okay, you've had your you got your next session coming in, or someone's like, yeah, hey Mike, we want to get you on this, no problem, I can do it. What kind of thing you after? We're after this. Okay, well, I got this drum kit and I'll bring these 5 snares with me, and that's what I used on this record. And I think, obviously you're like a consultant. You're saying, well, I
Oh,
think you should use this because, and that's why they're coming to you. But do you ever think the morning of, I'm gonna take that curveball snare drum with me just in case?
it's funny. Yeah, for sure. It's funny is like, sometimes you'll have that list that you think, or maybe this producer or engineer has used things that he likes, but then maybe one word might have been said,
Mm,
like in this conversation, that wasn't necessarily directly talking about the drums. It was talking something about the band or something. And I will have maybe jotted that down on my notepad and bring something because I heard that mentioned.
mm-hmm,
When I'm on a session, I'm all ears. I'm listening to the producer. I'm listening to the engineer. I'm listening to the bass player. I'm listening to the singer.
mm-hmm,
I'm listening to the guitar player. Because
mm-hmm.
all of these guys now are producers
Right.
themselves. In their own mind, they saw it on YouTube, and now they're producers and they've got it figured out.
Right.
And I'm telling you, I still don't. I'm still searching. I'm still on the quest. I'm still trying to figure it out. I know what I know, but I'm still obsessed with it.
I think
So, with that being said, sorry. With that being said, the drummer is sometimes, I've got my bond with him. I'm trying to have a bond with him. I'm trying to have his back. I'm trying to make him. He's sort of the last guy I listen to because he's got to answer to all those guys. Do you know what I mean? I mean, he's the first guy I listen to, but ultimately, the drummer's the bottom of the totem pole, unless of course you're Josh Freese or somebody like that who does
right.
sessions and amazing whatever they do. But the drummer, it's about the whole. I try to encompass what everybody's saying and to get a vibe, because I have the options for somebody. If I hear it and know something, will click in my head.
Before we move on about learning more, do you have a snare drum, a cymbal? Do you have a drum which you just know sounds amazing? It sounds amazing on pretty much all the sessions, but it would be one of those surprises when you turn up with it, when they're like, "Are you sure?" And you're like, "I'm telling you, this sounds great."
Like I said, I have the usual suspects.
Right.
And yeah, that's a great question. It's sort of a tough question,
Right.
just because, I mean, I could bring something super weird in, and it's
Yeah.
so weird that they might go, oh wow, that's cool. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of, I'm like the easy button, so I could have the weirdest thing and it could
Yeah.
work. Unfortunately, I kind of have a pass, if you
Right.
will, if I were to do that. I can tell you something. In that story, I remember I was working with Weezer. Rick Rubin was the producer. We were at a
Wow.
place in Malibu called, um, oh God, it's the band, the famous band house studio. I forget what it's called. There was a band in the '70s called The Band.
Oh yeah, I
It's,
love the
it's
band.
called
Yeah, yeah.
it's,
Oh,
it's
the
called
house, Big
called
Pink.
No, it's
No, no,
called
no.
Shangri-La Studios.
Ah,
We're there with Weezer. We're in this studio at the house. Um, two snare drums that are the most popular, most requested, most 99% of the time work on everything.
right.
Are the 1970 6.5 by 14 Ludwig Black Beauty, which is a brass shell, which is lacquered brass, the black. It's called the Black Beauty, and the Tama Bell brass, which is super heavy, weighs about 25 pounds, made out of what you would make a bell out of,
Hmm.
bell brass, 80s bell brass. I remember we were on this session. Pat was in a studio what I hadn't really worked at before. Pat was in a corner of the room on the floor. Scott was across, the bass player was across from him. Rivers was across from him, sort of like in a big living room of the house, and then a separate control room. And that Black Beauty snare drum wasn't working. It just was not working. And I was like, I started to freak out. I was like, oh my gosh, I had 10 other snare drums there with me. And I was like, man, this is not happening. And I was just kind of getting panicky. And I thought, well, let me try the bell brass. See, we're kind of already into it. I can't break the flow up, but we hadn't really started getting tracks of the song,
Right.
and it just wasn't happening. It's for some reason that corner of the room on the parquet wood floor with whatever was around, with maybe all of the band guys around, because the studio wasn't an open space, so there was an ambience. It was maybe drier because
Hmm.
of everything that was in the room. That wasn't working. I was like, I was freaking out, and I had been doing it for 10 years already, and so I just went to the snare drum rack, and I thought to myself, well, this doesn't sound like this should be a wood drum track. So I went to the least snare drum I think would work, and different material, not bell brass or brass, and got a wood snare drum, and I forget what it was, put it in the spot, and it just worked. It sounded great.
Wow. And did everyone agree? Was everyone?
Yes.
Wow.
And it's just like a weird thing. But to me, I'm panicking. Brought the drums to another studio, put them in the spot of the studio, and everything was fine. And I was like, whew. But there's circumstances, there's frequencies in the room, there's gear in
Hmm.
the room, there's all
Hmm.
this stuff. So nothing's guaranteed.
Do you
even even though the majority of the times you know what to get, what the instrument is going to sound like. You know what I
right?
mean? Naturally at source.
Do you ever get on so many sessions, and obviously you've got such an impressive gear selection, and it's your work, right? This is your
Mhm.
livelihood. Have to have these drums, and
It's my day gig.
it's your day gig. Yeah, you got two gigs: Tiger Army in the evening,
Yeah.
and day session gigs
Yeah.
with all your drums. But you must have drummers say to you, "Mike, please sell me this." That must happen. Do you ever get
Yes, I get more like, probably not going to make it back to your storage unit.
right?
It's more stealing than selling. So, what's funny is I have a lot of people ask me, come on, you got an old, I just need a shitty old snare drummer. I just need a little, it's like, unfortunately, I don't have anything shitty. You know what I mean? That's the crazy thing.
Hmm.
But partially having such an immense amount of drum kits, and why 58 drum kits and
Hmm.
200 snare drums, because I do have doubles and triples of
Hmm. Of
the
each
bell
one.
brasses and the usual suspects. So if there's 20 drums, that I or 10 drums and I have triples of them, that's already, a lot of the same drums.
Hmm.
But I do have great snare drums to cherry pick and great kits to cherry pick. But the way that the business is now, for me, from working for 10 years straight, 5 to 7 days on a record, let's just say on average, completely renting a drum set, being there to tech 12 hours a day, it's gone to, because the budgets have gone, it's gone to 5 to 7 hours. It hasn't gone to 3 days. It hasn't gone to 4 days. It hasn't gone to
Mhm.
2 days. It's gone to hours.
Mm.
So it's now what's happening is you need the faith of what the producer knows, like the Gretsch kit, the Black Beauty, the bell brass, the Zildjian cymbals. You know what I mean? Um, because they don't have the time to experiment like we used to.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that's unfortunately, you know, this podcast can't afford to record. Even the big guys can't afford to record. Now, if you're Metallica or Green Day or U2, you can afford to record. But the majority of the people, like with a record deal now, I don't even know what a record deal means anymore. Let's just
Right.
say the average band, not the Green Days or Metallicas, but let's just say the average band got $100,000 to make a record, and
Mhm.
they could do that record in um, 3 to 4 months. Now these record deals are $15,000 to $25,000. They've got to do this record in 3 weeks, top to bottom. So when
Right.
I was there for 5 to 7 days, now I'm there for 5 to 7 hours.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that's just the
Yes.
reality. So you know what's great is everybody's in this can't afford to record situation. Even the bands, the
Right.
bands that have deals, you know.
Yeah.
So so it's all about being a fit. Even when we had many days to do a record, it's still being efficient, getting the right thing there, getting the right sound there, making it happen, leaving options, having options, and making sure everybody's stoked with what's happening. So
Do you just I want to move into a little bit of I love the fact that you are keen to learn all the time. You know, you've said that a couple of times now. You never stop learning.
no,
I want to learn as much as I can, which is really honestly what I'm trying to do here. Of like, I've played guitar for a long time. I've also, definitely recorded a lot of cool stuff, and that I'm really proud of. But um, how can I learn more about it? How can I not just stop there? How can I do this more? Um, I guess my question for you is, who are go-to mentors for you? You know, you're a go-to person. People will say, Mike Fasano, he's your man. He's going to figure this out. But when you need help with maybe recording or some drum advice, do you have any people that you would call up and say, hey, I've got this right now. What would you do?
you know, definitely my friend Fred Archambault, which we're at his studio
Yes, we are. Yep.
doing this, where I do a lot of the recording stuff for myself and bands I'm in. He's a guy I pick his brain a lot about stuff. He's funny,
Hmm.
he's smart,
Hmm.
and he is disarming. Like if I'm stressed or somebody we're working with is stressed, he just has a way, and he loves drummers. He has the best relationships with drummers. That's what I'm a drummer, okay, and yes, I'm a drum tech. That's my business. That's my thing I have. That's my day gig. But he's always been really helpful for me to bounce stuff off of. Um, Bouncing off, like, how does this? I got this thing. How does this sound? How is it reacting?
Mm.
He's an honest ear to me. Also, I have a friend named Joe Barisi, who's an amazing producer, engineer, mixer. Joe, I remember I bought a couple snare drums from a guy, and I spent a lot of money. I spent like $6,000 on these 2 snare drums.
Wow.
Um, and we were doing a Buck Cherry thing. Buck Cherry was doing some music for a movie, and I remember bringing um, the snare drum into the studio, and I said, God, I just got this snare drum, and it was a Zildjian Noble and Cooley. Um, it was basically the drum alloy was Zildjian from the cymbals alloy made into a drum. And I brought it into the studio and I set it up into the place, and I just knew, and Joe is extremely no bullshit.
Hmm.
And I didn't know. I said, I got this drum, Joe. I didn't say it was a lot of money. I didn't say whatever. I've always wanted one of these. I've been reading about them, and they're kind of rare. There's less than 160 of them made, and
Hmm.
blah blah blah. And I'd love to give it a try if there is a song that we could try it on
Hmm.
this session, which was a few days, and we had some time, and we were at the great old Sound City
Hmm.
prior to Dave Grohl ruining it with the movie. because it was really about Dave Grohl and not the studio. But
Right.
uh, and I put the snare drum up for a track a couple of days in, because that's the other thing too, is you kind of, when you have the time, every day your ears react to the room, get more familiar. You as an engineer might change a microphone on the snare drum or the overhead or the toms. You know, when I was working with Jerry, there was always constantly tweaking. You'd never change the sound if you're still cutting tracks to that one song.
Mm-hmm.
But you can experiment a little, and you just kind of refine and you tweak and you farther mics, closer mics.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, it was the time we put the drum up, and Joe said, that sounds great, and let's use it. And we used it on whatever, some track for a movie
Mm-hmm.
thing. And it was great. So I got the approval, but I also I didn't I didn't bring it in the first thing.
Mm-hmm.
I just, you gotta let everything settle, and then your ears know what's going on in the room, in the
Right.
control room, and put this in. So it works. So Joe's a guy, Joe, now where where Joe, where Fred is, you know, uh, very accommodating
Mm-hmm.
and making whatever. Joe, if there's bullshit, he'll just say, dude, that's bullshit.
Right.
No way, man. I'm not going to take that.
Right.
I don't want this guy in the session. I want, where Fred is different. So I have these two polar opposite great engineer guys I work with. I also work with a great guy named Doug McKean. And if you guys don't know who Doug McKean is, investigate his work. He did
Okay.
Green Day's American Idiot, My Chemical Romance, The Black Parade. And those are a couple of the records I always get compliments on.
Mm-hmm.
And Doug is great. Another super funny guy, doesn't give a shit. Nothing stresses him out. Could be doing a million things and have the most off-colored sense of humor
Mm-hmm.
to disarm everything that's going around in the session, but yet nailing it. So Doug's great. So those are guys that I can trust. Whatever. On the other hand, going back to a situation, I remember I got hired to do some drums for a band with two producers I've always wanted to work with, and I'd heard about. I didn't know them, and I won't mention their names,
Mm-hmm.
but we were at a place I had done sessions at, and they had used another drum company
Mm-hmm.
to do the rentals for many years. That's,
Mm-hmm.
the Coke and Pepsi of the drum rental business. That's the guy. That's who they use. And I was just an alternate. I was just I was an indie. I was Jones Soda. If you know what Jones Soda is. I was bubblegum Jones Soda, and they were going to try me. So I went in the session. I remember I was playing drums, and I had my pork pie kit, which was my go-to kit prior to knowing that I should bring other stuff if somebody asked for it. It was my kit. I had worked in that room several times already. And I just remember I was playing for, I don't know, an hour and a half, 2 hours. And I kind of hear them in the talkback, but boy, something's just not sounding right. Something's not sounding right. And I was just like, it got to a point where I was like, gosh, I'd pull the headphone off with one ear and I'd listen and I'd play and I'd listen and I'd listen to the comments back. And I said, I don't know, maybe come out here and just have a listen. No, it's just, I think we should have called the Coke and Pepsi of the drum rental business in Los Angeles and got the blah, blah, blah kit.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, now I'm defeated. Here's guys that I really wanted to work with. And here's a thing that's just not working. Even though I'm hearing it going, gosh, it sounds like it's supposed to sound in here. Of course, I couldn't go in and listen to anything because I was playing, and the control room was not visible. And then I hear, like 2.5 hours later, oh my God, there it is. It's there. It's back. And I stopped playing. I said, what's wrong? Feeling dejected for 45 minutes, going, I could have brought that kit, blah, blah kit, if you would have asked me. You said, bring your thing, do your thing. This is your thing. They didn't see the kit. They didn't hear the kit that they got from the Coke and Pepsi of the business.
Mm-hmm.
And it was something different, whatever. And then there's the, oh my God. And never coming in to listen to the drums. And I said, what happened? They go, oh, it sounds great. I said, well, what happened? And then they said, oh, something was out of phase. We just flipped the phase on the overheads and everything's. And now, listen, Robby, like I said, I'm not an engineer. I don't want to be an engineer, but I
Right.
learned something about phase that day.
Yeah.
And I also learned, instead of doing the dick dance for 2.5 hours,
Yeah.
have them come in. Please just come in and listen. So
Right.
you can tell me right here. Not that I'm saying it's right. Not
Right.
that I'm saying I'm right. I'm not. Just listen in here. Because of that, I learned it could
Mm.
be a phase thing. It could be a microphone thing. Could be the things off asses. Could be two microphones crossed. You know, but I'm not an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, like I said, I don't want to be.
Right.
But I learned from that day. But I sweat bullets. I felt like shit. I was dejected. And I had been doing it for 10 years. And like I said,
Right.
still learning. I don't
Yes.
know everything. I don't want to know everything. I mean, I do want to know everything, but I don't claim to know everything. And that was the biggest lesson from
Right.
these guys. And I worked with them a few more times and whatever. But it was just, but it was like, it was a, it was a, it was a path
Mm-hmm.
to get to something that I had no control over.
Right.
And then these, oh man, these are the best drums I've ever heard, and blah
Mm.
blah blah, and
And that all
whatever.
came after.
You
Yeah,
know,
of course.
so I'm used to hearing that. It's the stuff like that makes me go, why?
Yes.
You know.
Yeah.
Anyways, sorry.
I no, that is a really, really good story. And yeah, and like I say, it's inspiring to hear you say, you know, after all these years, after doing all these sessions, I'm still learning, and you still have takeaway moments, and that is yeah, invaluable. I got one more question for you, Mike, if that's okay. So could you maybe just explain what the different feeling is to you, to being on a session, uh, for, you know, something you've been hired in for? What's the difference between that? And I think I know, but what's the difference between that and maybe you playing drums on a Tiger Army record? Now, you say you have this hands-off approach, obviously, when you're on other sessions and you're the, you know, the drum tech, and you're there to supply the drums and to give feedback when asked. But when you're playing drums in Tiger Army and you're recording your drums, um, do you get a little bit more detailed about microphones? Do you like to mess around with the placements? What's the deal about that?
Again, very lucky. Nick 13, our singer,
Mm-hmm.
guitar player. That's how he found me. I was
Right.
drum teching on a Tiger Army record. He
Right.
saw that I had a swing to my playing. He saw that I had something. He saw that I got great drum sounds. He saw that I hit the drums right a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
He put that in his bank when they had a problem with their drummer being shot and not doing, not being able to execute anything for a few days.
Mm-hmm.
I got the call. I had tuned those drums. I had tuned the drums in that room I was just telling you about, the phase thing
Yeah.
happening, that same studio, and called Grandmaster in Los Angeles, which is gone now. But um, he ultimately trusts my sense
Mm-hmm.
of where I'm coming from. This last record we did, the last couple things, we used Ted Hutt, who's a fantastic producer who I've worked for
Mm.
prior to being recorded by him in Tiger Army.
Right.
So, and Ted is a guy who's always in thought and sometimes a little bit poker face, respectfully, because there's just a lot going on. He's not like a guy like, oh my God, that's wonderful and great and blah, 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 and whatever, where some guys are.
Mm.
I worked with Nick Raskulinitz years and years ago, and he was like, oh man, that's kick-ass. That's great. That's awesome, man. Just real whatever. And Ted just had a lot more things going on in his head.
Mm.
But so I was a little worried the first time I recorded with Ted as a drummer, because I
Right.
know of the great drummers he's worked with, like Joe Soroyce from Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, and Mitch Marine, who played on the record before I got back in the band,
Mm.
Tiger Army, and Nick's solo record.
Mm-hmm.
And these just great guys. And I just thought, well, I know what I got to play here, whatever. And it's really weird. I think because Ted knew that I was going to bring great sounding stuff, appropriate, because we had worked out pre-production
Mm-hmm.
for the session, and I was going to be there to tune and keep everything from slipping.
Mm-hmm.
That button was gone.
Mm.
That question was gone. The thing that where he turned into a guy like Nick Raskulinitz
Mm-hmm.
was he was cheerleading me on behind the glass and making me feel comfortable and digging what is he became a different person to me as a producer.
Right.
So I was really, really fortunate. And but Nick, I've a long time ago I passed the question mark with Nick, and Nick has complete trust and faith and confidence. He knows I'm always thinking about making it better. He knows I'm always thinking for the best of the band, the part, whatever. Of course, in pre-production, we do figure out what the parts are. We do figure out what the things are. But when it comes down to it, he's hired Ted. He completely trusts Ted. Was his drum tech years and years ago, and now his drummer.
Right.
So we have a really great thing, and I'm so fortunate. I love what we're doing in Tiger Army. I mean, I wish because of COVID we're stuck now, but we made a great record. We started touring on it, Retro Future, did U.S. and Canada and Europe and Germany.
Yeah.
And then everything stopped. So we still got a lot to do with that record. I mean, whenever that happens, but I've been kind of nudging Nick a little bit, like, man, let's look, if we're going to have a 9 months or 6 months or a year off, let's just start fooling around. Me and him, he gets a couple ideas. Me and him go in the rehearsal room. We record it on our iPhone. We bring George A., our bass player, in eventually to play on it. We make an iPhone demo, talk about can't afford to record or too stupid to record because we don't know how to use any of this stuff. That'll be my podcast, Too Stupid to Record, with dumber Mike Fasano.
I'll definitely be on that podcast because that's definitely me too.
but yeah, we just get ideas. I got to approach him. Now it's 6 months of COVID. I've got to approach him again about doing it. I remember we were all deflated because we didn't know what was happening, what this disease was, this virus was, and whatever. But it'd be great because he comes up with riffs and we formulate stuff together and whatever. And so who knows what's going to happen? And then hopefully we'll get to work with Ted again. Yeah. And go from there. But like I said, putting a bow on this question, I've just been fortunate to have had the respect. Sometimes going in with Tiger Army or if I'm working with somebody bringing drums to their session, I've been very lucky to have had respect and trust. And that's something that
gives you your confidence to have that freedom and to not be worried about it or, to deliver the best thing possible.
And that's what music's all about. We're not digging ditches.
Yeah.
We're trying to make art.
Yeah.
And we're trying to make this art affect people.
Yes.
Positively. So.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, look, Mike, I can't thank you enough for being on the podcast and the video today. I really, really appreciate it. It's been so great to hear your point of view and a couple of those wonderful stories about you being in sessions and having different experiences and different takeaways. It's really, really cool. I cannot wait to listen to this back while I edit it all and learn all of it again. It's a lot of the fun part for me when I get to rewatch these interviews. But thanks so much. And I can't wait to come and see Tiger Army when you guys are back on the road and to hear new records. And it's going to be great. So thank you for being on the show.
It was my pleasure being here. Thanks for asking me. Thanks for being interested.
No worries. We'll speak again real soon.
All right. See you, Robby.
Bye.